The air in Summit National Bank crackled with unspoken tension, but for Lena Washington, it was a battlefield she'd walked 1,000 times before. She didn't just step through the revolving glass doors, she stormed them, her crimson blazer slicing through the sterile marble lobby like a blade through silk, a banner of defiance in a world that loved to see her shrink. Her heels struck the floor with the ferocity of a war drum click, 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 each sound a declaration. I'm here. I'm not begging. I'm taking what's mine. She carried the weight of Harbor Haven, a $5 million dream stitched from the ashes of a neighborhood that had raised her, broken her, and forged her into the woman she was now. This wasn't a meeting. This was a reckoning. 20 years earlier, she'd stood in a bank not unlike this one, a skinny 12-year-old clutching her mother's hand as a teller sneered, "We don't give loans to people like you." Her mother, Evelyn Washington, had straightened her spine, her calloused fingers tightening around Lena's, and whispered, "They'll try to bury us, baby. Dig your way out." That memory burned in Lena's chest as she crossed the lobby, her eyes scanning the polished columns, the smug faces behind the counters. She had dug her way out through late nights, lost jobs, and doors slammed in her face, and now she was here to claim the final piece, a loan to build homes for families like the one she'd been. But the bank didn't know it yet. This routine appointment was about to explode into a confrontation that would rattle its pristine walls to their foundation. It started innocently enough, or so it seemed. At 9:50 a.m., Lena approached the teller counter, her posture radiating the quiet confidence of a woman who'd turned grit into gold. Her crimson blazer hugged her frame, a deliberate choicered for power, red for the blood she had shed to get here. "Good morning," she said, her voice smooth but firm, a velvet glove over an iron fist. "I'm Lena Washington, here for my 10 a.m., with Mr. Hargrove." The teller, a nervous 20-something named Clara, flicked her eyes to the screen, then back to Lena, her smile twitching like a flickering bulb. "Let me check with Mr. Hargrove," she stammered, her fingers fumbling over the keyboard as if it might bite her. "Please take a seat, Ms. Washington." Lena nodded, unfazed, and settled into a leather chair that smelled faintly of privilege old money, stale cigars, the kind of scent that clung to men who'd never known hunger. She was early, always early, because time was her currency, and she didn't waste it. Her phone buzzed in her hand, a lifeline to the world she'd built beyond these walls. Texts from her team flooded in. Architects sent updated blueprints, 50 units, green spaces included. Community meeting tonight, 200 RSVPs. Jaden says the permits are locked. We're golden. Lena's lips curved, a flicker of pride breaking through her steel exterior. Harbor Haven wasn't just a project. It was a lifeline, affordable homes for single mothers juggling 2 jobs, for kids who deserved playgrounds instead of cracked sidewalks. She'd clawed her way from a crumbling apartment in East Side to a corner office downtown, building an empire from nothing. This loan? The final brick. Her credit was flawless, her business plan bulletproof. The bank's underwriting team had pre-approved it last week. This meeting was a formality, or so she thought. 10 minutes passed. The clock above the teller counter ticked with mechanical indifference. F5, 9:56, 9:57. Lena skimmed her notes, mentally rehearsing her pitch even though she didn't need to. She'd memorized every figure, every projection. 50 units, $5 million, a 10-year ROI that would make any banker salivate. At 10 bars, the lobby hummed with quiet activity, suits shuffling papers, phones ringing softly, but no Hargrove. Lena's eyes flicked to Clara, who was whispering to a colleague, a wiry man with a receding hairline and a tie too loud for his muted demeanor. Their gazes darted toward her, then away, like she was a riddle they couldn't crack. Her stomach tightened, a familiar knot she'd carried since childhood, but she kept her composure, legs crossed, hands folded, poise her shield. She'd faced worse than whispers, landlords who'd laughed her out of offices, investors who'd smirked at her ambition, a college advisor who'd told her, real estate's not for girls like you. She'd learned to swallow the bile, smile through the sting, and turn their doubt into fuel. But as the clock ticked past 10:15, that smile began to strain. She rose, her movements deliberate, heels echoing like gunshots in the hush. She approached the counter again, her shadow falling over Clara's nervous fidgeting. "Excuse me," Lena said, her tone polite but edged with steel, a blade sheathed but ready. "Has Mr. Hargrove been informed I'm here?" Clara's face flushed, her hands fluttering like startled birds. "Yes, Mom, he knows. He's just tied up. He'll be out soon." Lena arched an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch, heavy with unspoken questions. Clara shrank under it, her eyes pleading for mercy Lena didn't give. "Thank you," Lena said finally, retreating to her seat, though the word carried a bite. The lobby buzzed around her, a theater of privilege she wasn't meant to star in. A white man in a gray suit mid-40s, Rolex glinting, strode in and was whisked to an office in under 5 minutes. A blonde woman with a designer purse and a laugh like breaking glass sailed past, her appointment apparently more urgent than Lena's. Each tick of the clock was a jab, a reminder of the invisible lines she still had to cross, lines drawn in red ink decades ago, lines her mother had bled to erase. At 10:30 she caught a snippet of conversation from 2 tellers behind the counter. "She's still here?" Hargrove said to let her wait. Lena's fingers tightened around her phone, but she forced her breathing steady. Not yet, she told herself. Not yet. By 11 her patience was a fraying thread, a rope stretched to snapping. She stood again, her voice cutting through the hum of the bank like a whip. "It's been an hour. I'd like an explanation." Clara froze, her deer-in-headlights stare almost comical if it weren't so infuriating. She grabbed the phone, muttering into it, her words a jumble of apologies and excuses. "Hez coming soon, Ms. Washington," she offered, her voice weak as watered-down coffee. Lena didn't sit this time. She stood, arms crossed, a statue of defiance in the middle of the lobby, her crimson blazer a beacon against the muted grays and beiges. Customers glanced her way, some curious, some annoyed, one old man muttering, "What's her problem?" under his breath. She didn't care. She wasn't invisible, not today, not ever. At 11:30, her phone buzzed again. Jaden, her assistant, his voice crackling with urgency. "Lena, we've got a snag. City's threatening to pull the zoning permit unless we finalize funding by tomorrow. Where you at with the bank?" She pinched the bridge of her nose, the weight of the day pressing down. "Still waiting," she said, her tone clipped. "Hargrove's playing games." Jaden swore under his breath. "Need me to come down there? He'll bring the whole crew, make a scene." She almost laughed, picturing Jaden and her team storming the lobby like a protest march. "Hold off," she said. "I've got this." But did she? The doubt flickered, sharp and cold, before she crushed it. At 11:45, Vincent Hargrove finally slithered out of his office, a predator in a pinstriped suit. He was a wiry man in his 50s, all sharp angles and sharper arrogance, his slicked-back hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights like oil on water. His smile was a thin, oily thing that didn't reach his cold blue eyes, a mask he'd worn so long it had fused to his face. Earlier that morning, he'd stood in his office barking at a junior staffer, "Get me the files. Now, or you're out." His voice a whip that left the kid trembling. Power was his drug, and he wielded it like a junkie with a fresh fix. Now he turned that power on Lena. "Ms. Washington," he drawled, extending a hand she didn't take. "Apologies for the wait. It's been a hectic morning." Lena met his gaze, unflinching, her brown eyes boring into his like drills. "I had a 10 a.m. appointment. It's nearly noon. I'd like to get started." Hargrove's smile twitched, a crack in his facade, but he gestured toward his office with a flourish. "Of course, right this way." As they walked, Lena noticed the staff's sidelong glances, the way they stiffened at Hargrove's presence. Fear, not respect. Something was off, a primal warning humming in her bones, honed by years of navigating rooms where she wasn't welcome. She'd felt it before. The boardroom where a CEO called her articulate like it was a surprise. The construction site where a foreman joked she'd gotten her contract on her knees. This wasn't a busy schedule. This was a game, and she was the pawn they didn't expect to fight back. Inside his office, Hargrove sank into his leather chair, motioning for her to sit like she was a guest in his kingdom, a king granting an audience. He leaned back, hands clasped over his stomach, exuding the casual dominance of a man who'd never had to fight for anything. Not the corner office, not the 6-figure salary, not the right to be heard. "So," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "What brings you here today, Miss Washington?" Lena's jaw tightened, a muscle ticking beneath her skin, but she kept her voice even, a blade sheathed in calm. "You know why I'm here. The Harbor Haven loan. All the documents are in your system approved by your team. I'm here for the final signature." Hargrove's eyes flicked to his computer, then back to her, his lips curling into a smirk that made her want to claw it off. "Ah, yes, Harbor Haven. Big project. Ambitious." He clicked his mouse lazily, as if her life's work was a mildly interesting footnote in his busy day. "These things take time, you know. I'll need to review everything myself, make sure there are no oversights." His pause was deliberate, his gaze lingering on her, not her blazer, not her notes, but her skin, her presence, a silent challenge. "Prove you belong here." Lena's pulse quickened, a drumbeat of rage she tamped down with iron will. "I was told it's already approved," she said, her voice steady as granite. "Your underwriting team cleared it last week." Hargrove shrugged, a dismissive little gesture that made her want to flip his desk and watch his papers scatter. "Sure, but I like to dot my I's and cross my T's. You understand, don't you? Can't be too careful with projects like this." His eyes narrowed, a glint of something dark, prejudice, power, or both flashing beneath the surface. She didn't flinch. "Take your time," she said, her voice a blade wrapped in silk, sharp enough to cut but smooth enough to sting. "I'll wait." Hargrove's smirk faltered, a hairline crack in his armor, but he turned to his screen, dragging out the process with agonizing slowness. Minutes bled into an hour. He hummed to himself a tuneless, grating sound-scribbled meaningless notes on a legal pad, asked pointless questions. How many units again? What's the timeline? Each word was a pebble tossed into her patience, rippling the calm she fought to maintain. Lena answered every query with precision, her anger simmering beneath a mask of composure she'd perfected over years. She knew this game delay, deflect, degrade. She'd played it with landlords who lost her applications, with investors who questioned her experience, with men who saw her ambition as a threat. It wasn't about the loan. It was about power his to wield, hers to endure. At 12:30 her phone buzzed again, Jaden texting, "City's on my ass. Deadline's tomorrow. What's the holdup?" She typed back, Hargrove stalling, "Stay ready." Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear but from the effort of holding back. She glanced at the clock, 12:45, and the thread snapped. She stood, her chair scraping the floor with a sound that made Hargrove jump, his pen skittering across his desk. "Mr. Hargrove," she said, her voice low and lethal, a storm breaking over calm waters. "I came here in good faith. I've met every requirement, jumped through every hoop. If there's a problem, say it. If not, sign the damn papers, or I'll take my business and my money somewhere else." Hargrove's face reddened, his mask slipping, revealing the petty tyrant beneath. "Ms. Washington, I'm just doing my job." A knock cut him off, sharp and insistent. Tessa, a young assistant with wide eyes and a trembling voice, poked her head in. "Mr. Hargrove, the regional board's here for their meeting." His composure shattered, his hands fumbling with his tie as he shot to his feet, sweat beading on his brow. "Show them to the conference room," he snapped, then glanced at Lena, his eyes narrowing to slits. "We're not done here." Tessa hesitated, her gaze flickering to Lena with a mix of fear and recognition. "Actually, sir, they asked for Ms. Washington specifically." Hargrove froze, his Adam's apple bobbing like a cork in a storm. Lena tilted her head, a spark of curiosity igniting through her fury. "Is that so?" she said, her tone deceptively light, a predator scenting blood. Hargrove's lips pressed into a thin line, his discomfort a palpable stench. "Seems you've got friends in high places," he muttered, the words dripping with venom, a last jab from a man who knew he was losing. Lena didn't respond. She straightened her blazer, smoothing the crimson fabric with deliberate grace, and followed Tessa out, leaving Hargrove to stew in his own sweat. The lobby hushed as she crossed it, heads turning, whispers trailing her like shadows. She was a queen reclaiming her court, her heels a war cry against the marble. Ahead, the conference room doors loomed, tall and dark, and beyond them, a reckoning waited, one she'd been preparing for her entire life. The conference room doors swung open, and Lena Washington stepped into a cathedral of power, a sanctum of mahogany walls, a gleaming oval table, and a cluster of board members in tailored suits, their voices a low hum of influence that fell silent as her crimson blazer cut through the space like a flare. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and old authority, a room built for men who'd never known the sting of being overlooked. At the center stood Marcus Caldwell, a towering figure with silver hair and a baritone that could silence a storm, his broad shoulders filling out a charcoal suit that spoke of decades commanding respect. When he saw Lena, his stern face cracked into a grin that lit up the room, a beacon of warmth in a sea of cold calculation. "Lena Washington," he boomed, striding toward her with the energy of a man half his 60 years. "You're a sight for sore eyes." "Marcus," she replied, matching his warmth with a smile that masked the morning's wounds. 3 hours of waiting. Hargrove's sneers. The weight of a fight she shouldn't have had to wage. He offered a handshake, but she pulled him into a quick, fierce hug, a gesture that startled the other board members into curious murmurs. It wasn't protocol, but protocol had never been their bond. She'd met Marcus 15 years ago, a broke 20-something pitching her first property deal in a diner over burnt coffee. He'd been a regional VP then, a rare ally who'd seen her fire and bet on it when no one else would. "Still breaking the mold, I see." Marcus chuckled, stepping back, his hazel eyes twinkling with pride. "I hope Hargrove's been rolling out the red carpet for you." Lena's lips twitched, a flicker of irony she couldn't hide. "It's been an experience." Marcus' eyes narrowed, catching the undertone like a hound scenting blood. But he didn't push not yet. Instead, he turned to the room, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Folks, this is Lena Washington, the brain behind Harbor Haven. She's about to change the game, and we're damn lucky to have her here." The board nodded, a ripple of acknowledgement passing through the 8 figures seated around the table, some with genuine interest, others with the polite detachment of people who'd heard too many pitches. Lena scanned their faces, cataloging them instinctively. Ellen Pierce, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a reputation for fairness. Richard Voss, a balding traditionalist whose tight smile screamed skepticism. Julian Hart, a younger man with a quiet intensity, his gaze lingering on her with unreadable intent. Vincent Hargrove hovered by the door like a scolded child caught mid-tantrum, his pinstriped suit wrinkled from nervous fidgeting. He forced a smile, a thin veneer over his crumbling composure, and stepped forward, his voice tight as a wire stretched to snapping. "We were just wrapping up her loan details," he said, his words a clumsy attempt to reclaim control. "It's a big ask, $5 million, so I've been thorough. Due diligence, you know." Lena tilted her head, her gaze piercing through his facade like a laser. "Thorough's one word for it," she said, her tone neutral but laced with a challenge that hung in the air like smoke. The room stilled, the air thickening with unspoken stakes. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his casual demeanor sharpening into something lethal. "How's it been going, Lena?" he asked, his voice deceptively light but loaded with intent, a question that invited her to draw first blood. She exhaled, choosing her words like weapons, each one honed to strike true. "Your underwriting team was impeccable, efficient, professional, a credit to this bank. But today? I've been here since 10 a.m. It's almost 1 p.m. now." A ripple of surprise ran through the board, heads turning, eyebrows lifting. Ellen Pierce leaned forward, her pen pausing mid-note. Richard Voss's frown deepened, his fingers drumming the table. Julian Hart's eyes flicked to Hargrove, a shadow of suspicion crossing his face. Marcus' jaw clenched, his gaze snapping to Hargrove like a whip. 3 hours? For a scheduled meeting? His tone was quiet thunder, a storm brewing beneath the calm. Hargrove squirmed, his hands twisting the edge of his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. "I was ensuring everything was perfect, Marcus," he stammered, his arrogance crumbling under the weight of scrutiny. "Procedure, it's a complex deal. I had to double-check." "Complex?" Lena interjected, her voice rising for the first time, a controlled burst of fire that silenced the room. "My credit's spotless, 800 plus. My plan's airtight 50 units. $5 million, a 10-year ROI your own analysts called exceptional. Your team approved it last week. The only complexity here is you stalling me while others waltz through without a second glance." The room erupted in murmurs, the board members shifting uncomfortably, their polished masks slipping. Hargrove's face flushed purple, his hands balling into fists as he struggled to regain footing. That's an unfair accusation. Is it? Lena shot back, stepping forward, her heels clicking against the hardwood like gunfire. I watched a dozen people come and go while I sat there, suits, handbags, not a minute's delay. What's the difference between them and me, Hargrove? Go ahead. Say it. The challenge hung heavy and electric, a gauntlet thrown at his feet. The boardroom froze, breaths held, eyes darting between them. Hargrove's mouth opened, then snapped shut, his tongue tripping over the truth he couldn't voice. Not here, not now. His gaze darted to Marcus, a silent plea for rescue, but Marcus wasn't playing savior. "Vincent," Marcus said, his voice a blade, cold and precise. "Step outside. Now." Hargrove hesitated, his pride warring with his survival instinct, then slunk out, the door clicking shut behind him with the finality of a gavel. Marcus turned to Lena, his expression softening, though his eyes still burned with quiet fury. "I'm sorry, Lena. This isn't how we operate. It's not how I operate." She nodded, her anger cooling but not gone, a smoldering ember ready to flare again. "I know, Marcus, but it's how he does, and he's not alone." The weight of her words settled over the room, a truth too loud to ignore, a crack in the bank's polished facade. Marcus rubbed his temples, a rare sign of weariness, then straightened, his resolve hardening. "Your loan's approved. I'll sign it myself. And Hargrove? He's done here." The board murmured approval, Ellen Pierce nodding firmly, Richard Voss grunting reluctant assent, Julian Hart offering a faint, enigmatic smile. But Lena's mind was already racing beyond the victory, her thoughts a whirlwind of what-ifs and what-nexts. This wasn't just about her, it was about every person who'd been dismissed, delayed, degraded by men like Hargrove, by systems that propped them up. She'd won this battle, but the war stretched out before her, vast and unrelenting. The silence that followed Marcus' declaration was a fragile thing, shattered by Ellen Pierce's crisp voice. 3 hours is inexcusable, she said, tapping her pen against her notepad, her gray eyes narrowing. Vincent's been a loose cannon for years, complaints piling up, brushed aside. This isn't an isolated incident. Her words landed like stones, stirring the room into a quiet storm. Richard Voss scoffed, crossing his arms. "Let's not overreact, Ellen. He's a manager, not a dictator. Delays happen." "Not like this," Julian Hart countered, his voice low but firm, cutting through Voss's bluster. "I've seen the Harbor Haven file underwriting signed off days ago. There's no justification for this." Lena watched him, intrigued by his intensity, a flicker of curiosity piercing her exhaustion. Who was he, this quiet man with eyes that saw too much? Marcus raised a hand, silencing the brewing debate. "Well, deal with Vincent later. Right now, Lena's our priority. Let's hear her out." All eyes turned to her, a spotlight shed earned but didn't relish. She straightened, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I didn't come here for apologies," she said, meeting each gaze in turn. "I came for a loan I've earned 10 times over. But what I got was a reminder. No matter how high I climb, there's always someone waiting to push me back down. Hargrove's not the problem, he's the symptom. The question is, what are you going to do about the disease?" Her words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room. Ellen's pen stilled, her lips parting in quiet respect. Voss shifted, uncomfortable, his fingers drumming faster. Julian's eyes gleamed with something like admiration or calculation. Marcus leaned forward, his hands clasped, his voice a rumble of resolve. "You're right, Lena. This bank's got rot in its roots, been there longer than it'd like to admit. I've ignored it too long, thinking it'd fix itself. It won't. So tell me, what do you need from us?" Lena paused, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just a loan approval. It was an opening, a crack in the wall she could widen. "I need the loan signed today," she began, her tone firm but measured. "But more than that, I need a commitment, a real one, to root out what Hargrove represents. Training, oversight, accountability. I've got a community counting on Harbor Haven families who've been screwed by banks like this for generations. If you want my trust, earn it." Marcus nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. Done. The loan's yours effective immediately. And the rest? Well, start today. I'll call an emergency session after this. Vincent's not the only one who needs a reckoning. Ellen chimed in. I'll draft a proposal mandatory bias training, client feedback loops. We've got data showing minority applicants wait 30% longer on average. It's systemic. Voss grumbled. That's a stretch, but Marcus cut him off with a look that could shatter glass. It's not a stretch, Richard. It's a fact, and we're fixing it. Lena allowed herself a small breath, a sliver of relief piercing the tension. But her eyes caught Julian Hart's again, his faint smile unsettling her. He hadn't spoken since his initial defense, yet she felt his presence like a shadow watching, waiting. She filed it away, a puzzle for later. As the board debated logistics, Lena's mind drifted to that diner 15 years ago, the memory sharp as broken glass. She'd been 23, her savings a measly $2,000, her pitch scribbled on a napkin 10 rental units in Eastside, a bootstrap dream to lift her family out of debt. Marcus had walked in, a VP on a lunch break, his suit out of place among the chipped Formica tables. She'd flagged him down, desperate, her voice trembling as she laid out her plan. He'd listened, sipping burnt coffee, his hazel eyes piercing through her nerves. You've got guts, he'd said finally, sliding a card across the table, and numbers that don't lie. Call me tomorrow, we'll make it work. He'd kept his word, securing her first loan, mentoring her through the chaos of permits and contractors. When she'd paid it off in 3 years, 2 ahead of schedule, he'd toasted her with whiskey in his office, saying, "You're the future, Lena. Don't let him forget it." Now, watching him fight for her in this boardroom, she felt that bond anew, a lifeline in a sea of sharks. But she also saw the weariness in his slumped shoulders, the guilt in his tight jaw. Head climbed high, but not high enough to uproot the rot he'd inherited. Today, she'd push him to try. Before the meeting wrapped, Tessa slipped into the room, her hands clutching a manila folder, her face pale but resolute. She'd been a ghost all morning, a junior assistant too timid to cross Hargrove until now. She approached Lena, her voice a whisper. "Ms. Washington." Ken found something. From his office. She pressed the folder into Lena's hands, her fingers trembling. "Don't tell him it was me." Lena opened it, her breath catching. Inside were emails, dozens of them. Hargrove to an unnamed recipient. Delay Washington's app. Make it look legit. She's trouble, keep her out. Dates stretched back months, a pattern of sabotage predating her loan. She glanced at Tessa, whose eyes brimmed with fear and defiance. "Why now?" Lena asked softly. Tessa swallowed. "My brother, he applied here last year. Black like me. Hargrove rejected him. No reason. I've been scared to speak up, but you're not scared. I want to be like that." Lena squeezed her shoulder, a silent promise. "You already are. Thank you." She tucked the folder under her arm, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just her fight anymore. Marcus clapped his hands, ending the debate. "Lena, your papers are being drawn up, signed by 3 p.m. As for the rest, we'll dig in tomorrow. You've got my word." She nodded, gratitude warring with vigilance. "I'll hold you to it, Marcus." As she turned to leave, Julian Hart caught her eye again, his voice smooth as silk. "Impressive, Ms. Washington. I look forward to seeing more of you." His tone was polite, but something in it too slick, too knowing set her nerves on edge. She stepped into the hallway, Tessa's folder burning a hole in her grip, Hargrove's shadow lingering in her mind. The loan was hers, but the war was just beginning. As Lena Washington exited the conference room, the adrenaline that had fueled her through the boardroom showdown ebbed away, leaving a hollow ache in its wake, a void she couldn't name but knew too well. The victory, $5 million for Harbor Haven. Hargrove's downfall should have tasted sweet, a hard-won triumph after 3 hours of his petty tyranny. But it didn't. It was ash in her mouth, bitter and dry, because she'd faced him and come out on top, yet the scars of the morning throbbed beneath her crimson blazer. She replayed it all. Clara's nervous glances, the excuses piling up like bricks, the way Hargrove's cold blue eyes had lingered on her not with respect, but with something uglier, a disdain so familiar it was etched into her bones. It wasn't new, She'd seen that look in boardrooms where men in suits called her uppity, on construction sites where foremen smirked and asked who she'd charmed to get the gig, in the eyes of a world that couldn't fathom a black woman outsmarting it. Today, it had cut deeper, a jagged reminder that no amount of success her empire, her flawless credit, her name in headlines, could fully shield her from the biases that lurked like shadows in every corner. She paused in the hallway, her heels sinking into the plush carpet, and pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the rapid thud of her heart. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a whisper from decades past. "They'll try to break you, Lena. Don't let them." Evelyn Washington had been a seamstress, her fingers calloused from stitching dreams into every hem, her back bent from years of labor to keep Lena fed and clothed in a one-bedroom apartment where the walls wept with damp. Shed died 10 years ago, worn out at 55, but her lessons lived in Lena's blood. At 12, Lena had watched her mother plead with a bank teller for a $500 loan to fix their leaking roof, only to be turned away with a sneer, "We don't lend to your kind." Evelyn had walked out, head high, and spent the next month sewing extra hours under a flickering bulb to pay a roofer cash. That night, she'd sat Lena down, her brown eyes fierce. "They want you to feel small, baby. Don't. Build something they can take away." Lena hadn't broken, not then, not now. But the effort left scars, a latticework of pain she carried beneath her polished exterior. Hargrove wasn't just a man. He was a symptom, a cog in a machine that thrived on exclusion, grinding down people like her mother, like her, until they either quit or bled out. And behind him? The real puppet master, a system that rewarded his arrogance, that let him wield power without consequence, until today. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted across the bank's glass facade, casting long shadows over the parking lot where Jaden Carter, her assistant, waited by the sleek black SUV that had become their mobile command center. At 24, Jaden was a whirlwind of energy, his lanky frame draped in a tailored jacket and jeans, his dreads pulled back in a tight bun. He'd been with Lena 3 years, a kid from Eastside like her, his sharp mind and sharper mouth a perfect match for her relentless drive. He opened the passenger door, his grin wide and infectious. "Boss, you good?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and triumph. She slid in, forcing a grin that didn't reach her eyes. "Good enough. Loan's mine. Hargrove's toast." Jaden whooped, slamming the door and jogging to the driver's side, his energy a stark contrast to the exhaustion seeping into her bones. He started the engine, the rumble a low growl beneath his chatter. "That's my queen. Spill the tea. What happened in there?" "Did he cry?" "Tell me," he cried. Lena laughed, the sound sharp and raw, a release she hadn't known she needed. "Picture this. Me, sitting there like a fool while he plays king of the castle, dragging it out like he's God all day. Then the board walks in, Marcus Caldwell leading the charge, and his face? Priceless, like he'd seen a ghost, or his own obituary." Jaden cackled, slapping the steering wheel, the sound echoing in the car. "Man, I'd pay to see that. Dude's probably crying in his office right now, writing his resignation on a napkin." "Maybe," Lena said, her humor fading as the city blurred past towers of glass and steel, giving way to the grittier streets of Eastside, where Harbor Haven would rise. "But it's not funny, Jaden. It's exhausting." He sobered, glancing at her, his brown eyes narrowing with understanding. "Yeah, I get it. My pops dealt with that crap too, still does. Bank wouldn't give him a dime for his shop, said he was high risk. Took him 10 years to buy it outright. How do you keep going?" She stared out the window, the ghosts of her past flickering in the cracked sidewalks, the sagging porches. "Because if I stop, they win, and I'm not built to lose." Her voice was steel, but inside, the question gnawed. How many more battles? Hargrove was one man, a petty tyrant she'd toppled, but the system he served was a hydra cut off one head, and another grew, grinning with the same smug face. Shed won today, but tomorrow loomed, a shadow stretching across her path, and with it, the weight of a fight that never seemed to end. Back at her office, a converted warehouse downtown, its brick walls lined with blueprints and vision boards. Lena gathered her team, a ragtag crew of dreamers united by Harbor Haven. The space buzzed with energy, the air thick with coffee and determination. She stood before them, her crimson blazer swapped for a black sweater, her voice steady but fierce, a general rallying her troops. Today, I walked into Summit National expecting a handshake. Instead, I got a fight. They tried to bury me under their rules, their delays, their bullshit. But we're still here. This project? It's not just house sits proof we can't be stopped. The room erupted, a dozen voices overlapping. Hell yeah! They don't know who they're messing with. But beneath the cheers, tension simmered. Marisol Vega, the lead architect, a wiry woman with ink-stained fingers and a firecracker temper, slammed her laptop shut. So what now, Lena? We've got the loan, but the city's breathing down our necks, zoning's shaky. Permits are a mess. You sure this bank's worth the headache? I say we ditch 'em, find someone else. Her dark eyes blazed, her Puerto Rican accent sharpening her words. Derek Brooks, a burly contractor and single dad, crossed his arms, his deep voice cutting through. We can't afford to start over, Mari. My kid's school's in Eastside Harbor Havens, his shot at a real home. We stick with Summit, make it work. Marisol threw up her hands. And what? Keep kissing their ass while they jerk us around? I'm done with that. Lena raised a hand, silencing the brewing storm. We're not kissing anything. We've got leverage now. Marcus Caldwell's on our side, and Hargrove's out. But I hear you, Mari. This isn't blind trust it strategy. We use their money, their guilt, to build what we need. Then we hold them accountable. Marisol huffed but nodded, mollified for now. Derek grinned, a rare crack in his stoic facade. That's why you're the boss. The debate shifted to logistics blueprints unfurled, timelines scribbled on whiteboards, but a knock interrupted, sharp and urgent. Nia Patel, their PR lead, burst in, her phone clutched like a grenade. Lena, we've got a problem. Someone's leaking rumors, anonymous posts on X saying Harbor Haven's a scam, that you're pocketing the loan. It's trending. The room stilled, the air sucked out by the blow. Lena's gut twisted, Tessa's folder flashing in her mind Hargrove's emails, his sabotage. This wasn't random. Who's behind it, she demanded. Nia shook her head, her braids swinging. No ID yet, just a burner account. But it's coordinated, hitting local forums too. We need to counter this fast. Jaden jumped in, already typing on his laptop. I'll dig trace the IP, cross-check with bank staff. Bet it's Hargrove's parting shot. Lena nodded, her mind racing. Do it. Nia, draft a statement truth, no fluff. We're transparent, they're not. Mari, Derek, keep the team on track. This doesn't stop us. Her words steadied them, but as the room buzzed back to life, she slipped into her office, closing the door. Alone, she sank into her chair. Tessa's folder opened before her. The emails stared back. Delay her, keep her out, but a new one caught her eye. Time-stamped last week. If she pushes, escalate. JH. Julian Hart, the quiet board member with the too slick smile. Her pulse quickened, a thread of dread weaving through her triumph. That night, Lena stayed late, the warehouse silent save for the hum of her laptop. Jaden had traced the X-Post's not to Hargrove, but to an IP linked to Summit National's corporate office, a floor above Hargrove's. Someone higher up, with access and motive. She cross-referenced the initials JH against the board roster. Julian Hart, 38, VP of Strategic Investments, a rising star with a clean public slate but whispers of ruthless ambition. She dug deeper, pulling bank records from a whistleblower site she'd bookmarked years ago, redlining stats, loan denials, a pattern stretching back decades. Summit wasn't just negligent, it was predatory, and Hart's name surfaced in quiet corners, a shadow behind denials like her mother's. Her phone buzzed Marcus, his voice gruff. Lena, you okay? Heard about the rumors. She hesitated, then said, I'm fine. But Marcus, there's more here. Hargrove wasn't acting alone, someone's pulling strings. A pause, then a sigh. I've suspected it. Hart's been too quiet, too clean. Watch your back, he'll dig too. The call ended, leaving her staring at the screen. Hart's face from a corporate bio grinning back charming, calculated, a wolf in a suit. Outside, a car idled across the street, its headlights off. She squinted, catching a silhouette male, still before it peeled away. Her breath hitched, the folder's weight pressing down. This wasn't over. It was escalating. The next day, Marcus Caldwell's call came like a gunshot through the haze of Lena Washington's sleepless night. "Lena, we're forming a task force equity. Inclusion. The works. I want you on it." His voice crackled over the line, gruff but urgent, a lifeline tossed into the storm brewing around Harbor Haven. She stood in her office, the warehouse's brick walls closing in, Tessa's folder of damning emails still open on her desk, delay her escalate. JH. The rumors on X had exploded overnight, a venomous swarm of lies painting her as a fraud, threatening to choke her project before it could breathe. She gripped the phone, her knuckles whitening, the weight of the offer sinking in, a chance to strike at the bank's rot, but a burden too, another battle in a war she was tired of fighting. "I'm in," she said finally, her tone firm despite the tremor in her chest. "But it's gotta be real change, Marcus. No PR stunts." He chuckled, a rare, gravelly sound that eased the knot in her gut. "With you involved, it'll be a damn revolution. First meetings in a week. Summit's hosting a gala tomorrow night, too. Show your face, shake some hands. Well, start swinging after that." The call ended, and Lena sank into her chair, the city skyline glinting through the window, a battlefield of glass and steel where she'd won the lone, but uncovered a deeper enemy. Julian Hart's initials burned in her mind, a thread she couldn't yet pull without proof. Shed fight, but shed fight smart. The week blurred past, Jaden tracing the X rumors to Summit's corporate IP, Naya countering with press releases, the team rallying to secure permits despite the city's threats. By the time Lena walked into the task force's first meeting, her crimson blazer was armor, her heels a war drum against Summit National's marble floors. The conference room was packed board members, executives, a handful of junior staff, and at the door stood Tessa, her wide eyes bright with awe. "Ms. Washington Doe, can't believe you're here," she stammered, clutching a notepad like a shield. Lena smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder, the warmth a balm against the morning's chill. "Call me Lena, and thank you for speaking up that day. You're why I'm doing this." Tessa's face lit up, a spark of courage flickering beneath her nerves. Lena stepped inside, the room buzzing with potential, but her gaze locked on Julian Hart, seated near Marcus, his tailored suit pristine, his smile too smooth, too knowing. He nodded at her, a predator's greeting, and her gut twisted instinct screaming he was the JH behind Hargrove's Sabotage. Marcus opened the meeting, his baritone cutting through the hum. "We're here to fix what's broken, starting with how we treat clients like Lena. She's agreed to advise us, and we're damn lucky for it. Let's get to work." Ellen Pierce outlined reforms bias training, client audits, while Richard Voss grumbled about overreach. Lena listened, her mind split between strategy and suspicion, until Julian spoke, his voice silk over steel. "I commend Ms. Washington's tenacity, but reforms must balance progress with stability. Let's not destabilize what works." His eyes met hers, a challenge veiled as reason, and she felt the room shift, a chessboard forming beneath their feet. She leaned forward, her voice a blade. "Stability's a luxury for those who aren't stalled for hours, Mr. Hart. I'm here to make sure what works stops working against people like me." A murmur rippled through the room, Ellen nodding, Voss scowling. Julian's smile didn't falter, but his fingers tightened on his pinatel. She filed away. The meeting stretched on, proposals stacking up, but Lena's focus honed on him, the puppet master lurking in plain sight. The next night, Summit's gala glittered in the bank's atrium crystal chandeliers, black tie elites, a string quartet masking the tension beneath the surface. Lena arrived in a sleek black gown, her presence a quiet storm amid the chatter. Marcus greeted her with a whiskey in hand, his grin weary. "You clean up nice, kid. Ready to rattle some cages?" She smirked, sipping her own drink. "Always." But her eyes scanned the crowd, landing on Julian Hart, schmoozing with a cluster of execs, his charm a weapon she'd come to recognize. Jaden had dug deeper that week, unearthing a deleted email from Hart to Hargrove Washington's a liability. Bury her project quietly. Tessa had slipped her more. A memo Hart had buried, rejecting a black-owned business last year with no cause. The pieces fit, but proof was thin until tonight. She'd brought the folder, tucked in her clutch, a grenade waiting to be unpinned. Marcus introduced her to the room Lena Washington, the future of Summit's partnerships, and applause followed. But Hart's clap was slow, deliberate. She took the stage, her voice steady, cutting. "I'm honored to be here, but let's be real, this bank's got blood on its hands. Decades of redlining, denials, delays. I'm not here to polish your image, I'm here to fix it." The crowd shifted, some nodding, others stiffening. Hart's smile tightened, a crack in his mask. Then Tessa appeared, breathless, slipping her a USB drive. "Found this in Hart's trash encrypted, but it's his." Lena's pulse surged. She'd asked Tessa to dig, not expecting this. She handed it to Jaden, who'd crashed the gala in a borrowed tux, whispering, "Crack it now." He darted to a corner, laptop humming, as Lena mingled, Hart's gaze tracking her like a hawk. An hour later, Jaden returned, his face grim. "It's him orders to tank minority loans, back to 18. He's been running a shadow veto, overriding approvals. And Lena, he's got dirt on half the board to keep him quiet." She exhaled, the weight of it crushing. Hart wasn't just a cog, was the machine's architect. She caught Marcus' eye, nodding him over, and handed him the drive. "Julian's your rot. Proof's here." Marcus' face darkened, a storm breaking. "That son of a bitch." He stormed to the mic, cutting the quartet mid-note. "Ladies and gentlemen, a moment. We've got a traitor in our ranks. Julian Hart's been sabotaging clients like Lena for years. Evidence is irrefutable." The room gasped, heads swiveling. Hart shot to his feet, his charm evaporating. "This is slander, Marcus." "Then explain this," Lena snapped, stepping forward, Jaden projecting the emails onto a screen, dates, names, orders to bury her, others. The crowd erupted, execs shouting, Hart's allies scrambling. He lunged for the mic, but Marcus blocked him, voice thunder. "You're done, Julian. Security, get him out." Hart's mask shattered, his snarl raw. "You think this ends with me? The system's bigger than any of us shall never win." He was dragged out, spitting venom, but his words lingered, a chill in Lena's spine. The gala dissolved into chaos, board members huddling, press swarming, but Lena slipped away, her victory hollow. Her phone buzzed. Carver Bank, a rival, offering $6 million no strings if she walked away from Summit. It was tempting clean money, no fight. But Marcus found her, his voice low. "Lena, we need you. Hart's gone, but his cronies are still here. Walk away, and they win." She stared at the city lights, her mother's whisper echoing, "Build something they can't take." Carver's offer was safety, but Summit was the war she'd started. She texted back, "Thanks, but no." The cost hit Carver's funds could fast-tracked Harbor Haven, eased her team's strain. She'd chosen the harder path, the one that might break her. The gala's chaos faded into the early hours of the morning, leaving Summit National Bank's atrium a graveyard of shattered champagne flutes and whispered scandals. Lena Washington stood on the sidewalk outside, the cool night air biting at her skin through her black gown, the city's pulse humming beneath her feet. The victory should have felt like a crowned Julian Hart exposed, dragged out in disgrace, his shadow empire of sabotage laid bare on that projected screen for all to see. But it didn't. It was a weight, heavy and jagged, because Hart's final snarl echoed in her ears. "The system's bigger than any of us shall never win." She'd toppled a kingpin, secured Harbor Haven's future, but the war wasn't over, it was just shifting, a hydra sprouting new heads in the dark. Marcus Caldwell emerged beside her, his charcoal suit rumpled, his silver hair disheveled from the night storm. He handed her a coffee, the steam curling into the air, his hazel eyes weary but resolute. "You did it, Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Hart's gone fired, effective immediately. Board's launching a full audit. You shook this place to its bones." She took the cup, its warmth seeping into her chilled fingers, but her smile was thin. "Did I, Marcus? Or did I just piss off the beast?" She nodded toward the bank's towering glass facade, its lights glinting like eyes watching her retreat. "Hart wasn't the root, it was a branch. Someone else is still out there, pruning projects like mine, keeping the game rigged." Marcus sighed, rubbing his neck, a man carrying decades of compromises. "You're right. I've been blind too long, thought I could fix it from the top, but the rot's deep. Tonight was a start, though. You've got allies now. Ellen's pushing reforms. Tessa's stepping up. Well, keep fighting." He paused, his gaze softening. "You could have taken Carver's deal, walked away clean. Why didn't you?" Lena stared at the horizon, East Side's silhouette faint against the dawn. Her mother's voice whispered through the years, "Build something they can't take." "Because running's not winning," she said finally. "I stayed for the kids in those houses. For Tessa. For every person Hart crushed. If I quit, they lose." Marcus nodded, a flicker of pride breaking through his fatigue. "You're the real deal, Lena. Always were." They parted ways, Marcus to rally the board, Lena to her SUV where Jaden waited, his laptop glowing with updates. "Team's buzzing," he said, grinning. "Permits cleared, city backed off after Nia's press blast. We're breaking ground next week." She exhaled, a knot loosening in her chest. Harbor Haven would rise, brick by brick, a testament to her defiance. But Hart's words gnawed, a splinter she couldn't pull. The following days unfolded like a slow burn. Summit's audit uncovered a trail of Hart's sabotage, dozens of minority-owned businesses denied, their files buried under fake risk flags, his fingerprints on every rejection. Hargrove's firing was permanent, his office stripped bare, but whispers spread of Hart's allies circling, execs who'd profited from his shadow vetoes. Marcus pushed through reform's mandatory training, a client oversight panel, but resistance simmered, Voss and his ilk dragging their feet. Lena watched from the task force, her voice a hammer against their excuses. Tessa at her side, notepad in hand, her timid shell cracking with every meeting. Back at the warehouse, her team celebrated Marisol sketching playgrounds, Derek hauling mock-ups, Nia fielding calls from reporters hungry for the story. Lena stood among them, her black sweater a quiet contrast to their chaos, pride swelling in her chest. This was her army, her family, forged in the fire of Summit's betrayal. She gathered them one evening, the sun dipping below the skyline, and spoke, her voice steady but fierce. "We won a battle, not the war. Harbor Haven's ours, but the system that tried to kill it, it's still out there waiting. We don't stop, we build, we fight. We make them regret crossing us." Cheers erupted, but later, alone, she drove to East Side, parking near the vacant lot where Harbor Haven would stand. A girl maybe 10, braids swinging, kicked a ball against a crumbling wall, her laughter cutting through the dusk. Lena stepped out, the girl's eyes widening. "You're that lady from the news?" she said, awestruck. "You building houses here?" Lena nodded, crouching to her level. "Yeah, kid. For you, your friends, your mom." "What's your name?" "Kayla," she replied, shy but bright. "Can I have a room with a window?" Lena's throat tightened, her mother's ghost in the girl's eyes. "You'll have the best window in the place," she promised, and Kayla grinned, darting off. Lena lingered, the moment a spark-shed mentor this generation, shield them from the battles she'd fought. Weeks later, Harbor Haven's groundbreaking drew a crowd team, residents, press shovels glinting in the sun. Lena spoke, her words a rallying cry. "This isn't just a project, it's a stand. We took their no and made it a yes. But don't get comfortable, the fight's not done." Applause thundered, but as she stepped away, Jaden handed her an envelope, unmarked, slipped under her office door that morning. She tore it open, her breath catching a single line in typed black. Hart was the pawn. Checkmate's coming. Her pulse raced, the crowd's cheers fading to a hum. She scanned the faces: Marcus, Tessa, strangers searching for the threat. Hart's allies, a new player, the system itself, flexing its claws. She tucked the note away, her jaw set. Let them come. She'd be ready. That night, Lena stood on her office balcony, the city sprawling below, a tapestry of light and shadow. She thought of her mother, of Kayla, of every soul Hart had crushed, and her resolve hardened. This wasn't a fairy tale, it was a war cry. She'd turned disrespect into a weapon, prejudice into progress. But the real twist was the enemy still lurking, pulling strings from the dark. Could she find them? Could she break the system for good? That was up to her and them, the ones who'd rise with her. She whispered to the night, a vow. Change isn't given, it's taken. Well, take it all. The wind carried her words, a spark igniting the future, a fight unfinished, a hope unyielding.